For me, in thinking about today, I ran into a quote of Babaji's that, a couple of quotes of Babaji that I thought are a good starting place. And he wrote, "Anyone can attain liberation who understands what is causing bondage." Anyone can attain liberation who understands what is causing bondage. And then he went on to say, that which we have created in our mind, we're capable of removing. It's only a matter, get this, only a matter of conditioning and deconditioning the mind. And we often heard him say that yoga is deconditioning the mind. So the question obviously would come is, how have we conditioned ourselves? And in that, there's an enormous amount of depth and complexity into our conditioning and how we condition ourselves. And the fundamental principle that we as observers, the fundamental operation of an observer is making distinctions. So from the moment we're born, we're making distinctions. You know, the mother's face, the father's face, and then we gradually, our world gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're making distinctions about our world. What's good for us, what's not good for us, what's pleasurable, what's painful, what we need, what we don't need, and so on. So there's a kind of an infinite progression there. And a lot of the work that's been done in neurobiology, neuroscience, and so on, has developed an understanding that actually sits underneath this fundamental aspect of how we're conditioned. Because another corollary in that is that we all live within a medium, like we're all each other's medium. This room is our medium, and nature is our medium. We all live within a medium, and the medium can perturb us, but actually it doesn't specify our response. Our response is always a choice from the biological system that each of us are. And there's a word, autopoiesis, which means self-making. The purpose of each of our biological systems is to make and sustain itself. And we have to live in some kind of congruence with our environment or we perish. And so a lot of what just got said about how we think and what we believe to be true is based on a self-conditioning that occurs from how we choose to respond either consciously or unconsciously to our experience. The way human beings tend to respond to perception is that what we imagine is that there is an independent, separate world out there that we can know. But the problem is that the process of perception itself is invisible to us. It just happens. And so as we observe the world, there's a kind of a presumption that we're seeing the world as it is. But actually what we're seeing in the world is how we're conditioned to see the world. Yeah. And that's based on a lot of things. One is called a process of abduction, which is that we see parts and we create wholes. So we have an experience, this was an experience, And then from that, we say, well, okay, that's what it is. But we're only seeing parts and we're imagining wholes. So especially in trauma and things that happen, especially when we're being acculturated at an early age before we have the capacity to be able to make distinctions about what we see, we make assumptions about what we see. And so that becomes our thoughts, our thought waves, our thinking process. And human beings are also disposed to constantly think. It's just worked into the system. Our whole system of being alive is to be alert, you know, from the very most primitive mind is to be alert, to protect yourself. And we think in language. So our thoughts often become habituated so that when we have experiences and we have a propensity to think in a certain way about things, we create these little neural pathways in the brain like holographs, and that becomes our reality. This is how the world is. And we tend to respond and to react according to the way we have already, as Babaji said, acculturated ourselves, how we've conditioned ourselves to think. And so in that, we make a lot of assumptions. We code things that come in based on memory. This happened to me before. This feels like what happened to me before. I'm going to code it in this way. But as a number of people have already said, well, maybe we don't know. And what would happen if we realized that we didn't know? And that we could open our mind to considering that it might be different than our initial perception. Because what we have is very little resistance to our response or reaction to things that are based on the patterns of the pattern of mind that's been created. Guy or somebody? Okay, I thought I heard the beginning of the question. Oh, you're welcome. And so many things that you just said are part and parcel of, in this process of liberation, what are we doing? Well, if we don't understand how our minds work, what the human operating system is, then we have difficulty, I think, because we might blame ourselves, you know, or we might criticize ourselves, or just as bad, we were saying it's this other person's fault that's creating how I feel and how I think. And to stop and try to reflect on that is very difficult, especially at the pace at which we live these days. And with all of the distractions and all the things that are being pushed at us, and the marketing and the absolute constant presence of things technological in our lives, very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah.
What do you think that openness provides, or what does it open to? Or repeat the question.
Yeah, I can repeat the question. She says, what does that openness provide? What can it do? It produces possibility. Intelligence in some of the neurobiological world is defined as a flexible response to context. So if these patterns that are formed in the mind, they become our identity. And when they're challenged, it's very similar when the logic systems that we have about what is so are challenged. It's kind of a death. There's a fear of disappearing in listening when someone's saying something that's different than what we think. So this is why in the small groups, questions of clarification, rather than I agree, I disagree, this is what you should do about it, is to ask questions of clarification. That's why it changes the world so quickly. Is because you're giving the person that you're listening to the opportunity to go deeper, and you're also testing whether you're actually understanding. I find often, if I ask a question of clarification, the response will be one where I went, oh, I didn't really get it. This makes more sense now. So what you get is a flexibility of mind, which opens up new possibilities for shifting your thinking. But changing these patterns, in yoga we call them samskara, tendencies of mind, habitual patterns of ways of seeing the world, and that comes in memory, and Babaji writes in this that especially when we have painful memories, we tend to get absorbed in those painful memories. Or, I often use the example of when you stub your toe, your whole mind goes to the toe, And so when we're carrying painful memories and things arise in our experience that feel like that from the process of memory, right? It feels like that's happening all over again, and then that perception causes us. Okay. We're conditioned by our thinking in so many ways. Peptides. Take peptides, for example. Did any of you see What's the Bleep?
Yes.
Okay. In the middle of that movie, I remember I was sitting there and I was saying, oh, expletive deleted. I'm doing it to myself. So the body produces peptides, which are connected with emotions, and the more you produce them, the more you produce receptors. So we actually pattern ourselves, we condition ourselves to certain states of mind, which become more prominent. So there's an example. Abduction, the process of seeing something, leaping to the conclusion that this is what it is and responding to it, right? Without being curious. So this is another aspect of the small group philosophy, which is curiosity greater than criticality, being open to not knowing, such that we can change our conditioning, but it's not easy. So the term regular sadhana mean to anything to anybody? that used to be one of Babaji's responses often. What do I do about this? Regular sadhana, regular practice. So we engage ourselves in a practice. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is what's the relationship between regular practice, the process of sadhana, and the liberating oneself in their daily life. Because I think often we break things into areas that we don't connect, that don't seem connected. And I had this wonderful epiphany fairly recently, after many years of practice, that I suddenly attained awareness that I didn't concentrate very well after 50 plus years. And going back to Babaji's original statement of, that as he said, anybody can get liberated, if they're willing to see or able to see what's holding them in bondage. And so the result of that was realizing that I needed to improve my concentration. So we could put this into a lot of different buckets, I'm sure, about the things where we go, oh yeah, I'm doing that. That's not really working. And so, and that's holding me back. The question is, what's holding me back, So, seeing the relationship between the actual practices that we're doing And how that might roll out into our daily lives, to me, struck me as an interesting thing, because the next thing that I realized after realizing how bad my concentration was and I needed to improve it is that when I started working on my concentration, what was that? So in pranayama or in meditation, we're trying to focus on an object. And so we can focus on the object and oops, and there's the object, and oops, there's the object. But there's another connection that we have to make, I think, and that is to realize that as we're concentrating, how quickly the mind will go off in numerous directions. So let's say we're doing alternate nostril breathing, starting at the beginning of the beginning, right? That's the first thing we learn. If you are using the mantra Om, say, with inhale and exhale, exhale, and then inhale and exhale, inhale and then exhale, is to track as you're going through when the mind goes off. That the mind actually gets stolen away by the thoughts. And one of Babaji's other great aphorisms is, a watched thief can't steal. So if you become aware of the fact that your mind is going off and you can bring it back, you're watching the thief and bringing it back, right? And bringing the mind back and bringing the mind back. You kind of in a process of what I call failing your way to success, right? But simple awareness of the fact that the mind is going off track is useful, because think about it, when we are trying to develop some kind of transition from being stuck in something, it's a matter of concentration and awareness first. Oh, this is happening. Oh, I'm getting angry here, or oh, I'm getting attached over here, or there's an awareness. And when there's an awareness, there's a choice. And so the way I sort of tracked that was in becoming more aware of the thief that was stealing, that concentration outside of practice, just walking around the loop, watching your mind. Somebody mentioned it, I call it subjective distance, is a little gap between the thought and the awareness that opens up. Oh, there it is again. And in the repetition of that, there comes in a choice that we can make. I'm going to pursue that, or I'm not going to pursue that. So in realizing, I remember I was actually walking around the loop one day, and after I was sort of working through this rather delayed process of waking up, oh, gosh, there's that negative thought. And oh, gosh, that negative thought comes up a lot. And then a choice. Because what do? We can return to the mantra. We can return to the concentration. And we can actually shift our mental stance. And we can say, okay, that's actually not useful. Some thoughts are not useful. Well, actually, all thoughts at some level are not useful. And in Babaji's little handbook on binding the thoughts, the idea is get rid of the binding thoughts. And so coming to some level of awareness of what's not working for us in our thinking is a step in a process to developing the ability to change our thinking. And as we think, so we are. So the idea that, and this shows up in other areas in the sort of emotional awakening of, there's a system called 6 seconds, where if I have a feeling or a thought and I can shift it for 6 seconds, it goes away. Have you seen that system? Anyway, there's a fellow that I know that has an organization called 6 Seconds, and it's about changing the mind, transforming the mind. So I don't know if it's useful, but for me, the idea that I have a choice is a powerful idea, and that I'm responsible for the choice is a powerful idea. That I can take responsibility rather than, you have a negative thought and you're going, well, that person, they did that, is to realize I'm choosing now. And so I don't know if I'm articulating that well, because actually a fairly new revelation, I guess I'd say, of a different level of responsibility that I have to my thinking. And to realize how those patterns, some scars are deeply ingrained. And some of them, that goes back to family of origin stuff. It goes back to choices that I make all the way along the line. But nobody told me that there was no out at that point. There was no awareness of it. And so I think this process of concentration is terribly important to the transformation from binding thoughts to liberating ourselves from binding thoughts or habits or choices. That we can actually create a little bit of distance, subjective distance, where we are able to realize that it's not an independent, objective world that we live in, that the world is being created within our minds. And we choose. And as we choose, we transform, we become that which we choose. Those are choices that we're making. Often very, very unconscious choices, but choices nonetheless. So, the other thing about it is in the quieting of the mind, quieting of the mind, we actually change our threshold of awareness. So if we're not aware of something, right, then it's falling below our threshold. If we don't make that distinction never happens. And so it seems to me in the modern world that we live in right now, with the inundation of intensity of everything that's coming at us, it's like an addiction. It takes a little more of something to get a response out of us. And that our threshold of awareness is actually not getting better. We're getting more numbed out to things. And so in the quietude of mind, the threshold of awareness opens up. We're able to notice things at a more subtle level. And I'm going to project here, and I think I mentioned it last time we talked, but I think it's an important thought, is that one of the reasons we're all sitting here today is because Baba Haridas, in his sadhana practice, from my perspective, developed a threshold of awareness that was highly sensitive to the people around him. That he saw people and he noticed people and he noticed subtleties in people that we didn't know in ourselves, we didn't notice in ourselves. And he could see us in a way. And in that seeing, we showed up. And in the being seen, we suspended our disbelief. And the lessons and the discipline and the modeling that he had built Mount Madonna through his students. who wound up doing a lot more than they imagined they could do or intended to do. I did not intend to be here 52 years later when I met him, or 54 years later when I met him. But that noticing and then that exemplary kind of behavior based on what? Self-discipline would be one thing, karma yoga, doing the work for others without imagining what was coming back, humility. So what we know, these things that have always been true, they call them the verities, living the verities, living the things that bring us together, that make us closer, that bring us into community. So a gathering like this is a community. It's a network of conversations with a common criteria of validation. There's a convergence of people who are interested, are seekers, are interested in the idea of liberation or the idea of coming out of suffering. 80% of the people who come to spiritual practice, according to the scriptures, come out of some version of suffering. I don't know if we were going to do the demographics in the room, but I would be in the 80%. I had to do some really stupid things before I decided I needed to wake up, and so when you reach that point where it's not working or it's not enough, that's when we begin to look for relief.